The day my best friend asked me to help plan her wedding, I didn't know I'd be decorating the altar for my own heartbreak. The florist's scissors clicked against the table, snipping through stems of white lilies. I remember the sound clearly because it cut through my chest just as sharply. It was a warm afternoon in early June, the kind where sunlight filters through lace curtains and dust motes dance like secrets. I was standing in my friend Lena's dining room, helping her tie little ribbons around jars for her centerpieces. She was glowing, humming to herself, her engagement ring catching the light. I thought she looked happy because she'd found love. I didn't know that love had once been mine. At that moment, nothing seemed strange. She was my oldest friend, the one who'd sat beside me through every doctor visit when I was trying to get pregnant, the one who'd brought me soup the night my marriage fell apart. She had been there when I packed the last box from the house my ex-husband, David, and I had built together. She'd held my hand, whispered, "You'll find yourself again, Maya." That day, I believed her. I really did, but as I twisted those ribbons and watched her cheeks flush pink with joy, something in me, something quiet and buried, began to stir. It wasn't jealousy. It was recognition. The way she smiled when she talked about him. The pauses before she said his name. The hesitation when I asked, "So who is he, Lena?" And the way her eyes flickered away, just for a second, just long enough for my gut to whisper, "Don't trust that silence. Life before all that was simple, even sweet in its ordinariness." After my divorce, I moved into a small townhouse near the edge of town. One of those places where every porch looks the same. But the quiet feels different in each home. I filled mine with small comforts, a lemon-scented candle, a cheap but cheerful rug, and a second-hand piano I played at night when the loneliness pressed too close. I worked as an office manager at a dental clinic. The hours were long, the gossip predictable, and the coffee terrible. But the routine was my anchor. Most evenings, Lena would stop by. She'd bring takeout, sometimes Thai, sometimes pizza, and she'd sit cross-legged on my couch while I poured us wine. She'd tease me for still having David's framed photo on the bookshelf. "Girl, why keep that man's face around?" She'd laugh. "I don't even see it anymore," I'd shrug. But that wasn't true. I saw it every day. David had been my first love. The kind of love that starts with shared French fries in college cafeterias and ends with joint bank accounts and exhaustion. He was charming, practical, steady, the kind of man who made you believe stability was love. But over the years, that steadiness hardened into distance. We grew polite instead of passionate. Our arguments were quiet, almost courteous, and that civility was somehow more painful than shouting. When it ended, there wasn't another woman, or at least, that's what I believed. It was simply, "Over. You deserve happiness," he'd said as we signed the papers. "Then why couldn't you give it to me?" I'd asked. He didn't answer. Months passed. Healing is a slow thing. It doesn't arrive like morning light. It creeps in like dusk, gentle and uncertain. By the time Lena announced she'd met someone, I was genuinely happy for her. She deserved love. She'd been there through all my storms. She said he was kind, thoughtful, a little older. I joked that maybe she'd finally met a grown-up worth keeping. She never told me his name. And I didn't press, because that's what friends do. We trust. We went dress shopping together. I zipped her into lace and satin, took pictures on my phone, and told her which neckline made her glow. I even helped her draft her wedding website. Every time she talked about him, though, she'd trip over his pronouns. He said, well, they said, he... I chalked it up to nerves. Maybe she was protecting him from being Googled. Or maybe, though I didn't admit it yet, I was afraid to know, because deep down, something about her excitement felt familiar. The little phrases she used, "He calls me sunshine," "He hates when I skip breakfast," those were David's phrases. I remembered them too well, still I laughed it off. "Sounds like you found your own version of my ex," I said once. She smiled, too quickly. Maybe I did. One Sunday afternoon, she brought her fiancé's suit to my house. "I need help picking a tie," she said, holding up two options, navy and charcoal. I remember touching the fabric and thinking how strangely similar the suit was to one David had worn to my cousin's wedding. Same cut, same subtle plaid? "That's nice," I said softly, and then I noticed it. A small, almost invisible detail. The cufflinks. Silver ovals engraved with the initials DLH David L. Harris, my ex-husband. The room seemed to tilt slightly, like my balance had been snatched from beneath me. I must have stared too long because she snatched the suit back, laughed nervously. "Oh, they're borrowed." "From a friend." "From who?" Someone at his office." The lie was clumsy, but I let it sit. Because admitting the truth aloud, even to myself, would have made it real. That night, I couldn't sleep. I sat in bed, the glow from my phone screen lighting up the walls as I scrolled through memories I'd tried to bury. Old photos, old texts, old birthdays. And then, curiosity, or maybe desperation, made me type David's name into Facebook. His profile picture had changed. He was smiling, and beside him, a woman's hand rested on his shoulder, manicured nails painted blush pink, the same color Lena had shown me for her bridesmaid dresses. My stomach turned cold. Still, I told myself, it can't be. She would never. Lena wouldn't do that to me. She was my person, my history, my family by choice. But denial is a powerful thing. It lets you sleep through the fire alarm until the smoke fills your lungs. The next day she texted, "Can you come to the cake tasting tomorrow?" "I trust your taste more than anyone's." I said yes, because part of me needed to see, to know. The bakery was downtown, the kind that smells like vanilla dreams and nostalgia. She was already there when I arrived, sitting at a small corner table, stirring her coffee like it had insulted her. She looked up and smiled, nervous around the edges. "You made it." "Wouldn't miss it," I said, even though my chest felt like glass. Halfway through the tasting, she reached into her purse and pulled out an ivory-colored envelope. "I almost forgot," she said, handing it to me. "Your invitation." I laughed, pretending to wipe frosting from my fingers before I opened it. The card was simple and elegant. Cream paper, gold lettering, the smell of fresh ink, and there it was. "Lena Ross and David Harris invite you to celebrate their marriage." My fingers went numb. The room spun. Somewhere in the distance, a child laughed. A coffee machine hissed, sounds of ordinary life that mocked the hurricane in my chest. I don't remember what I said then. I think I whispered, "You're marrying David?" Her face drained of color. She opened her mouth, closed it again. "I wanted to tell you," she began. I really did. I stood up so quickly my chair scraped the tile. People were watching, forks frozen halfway to their mouths. "I need a minute," I muttered, and I walked out into the street. The invitation still shaking in my hand, like a confession I never asked for. That was the moment the world shifted. The day my best friend became the woman my husband once loved. But that wasn't the worst part. The worst part was realizing I'd been helping them all along. I don't remember how I got home that day. Just the sound of my heels hitting the pavement. Sharp, uneven, frantic. I walked past bakeries, bookstores, a couple holding hands. Everything blurred. My phone buzzed in my purse again and again. I didn't look. When I finally reached my townhouse, I sat in my car for a long time, the invitation on the passenger seat like an open wound. Lena Ross and David Harris. Their names looked right together. The fonts matched perfectly, as if the universe had been planning this all along. For a long while, I didn't cry. I just stared. My body felt numb, like my soul had left to protect itself. Inside, the house smelled like the lemon candle I'd lit that morning. My cat, Miso, brushed against my leg, purring for dinner. Life didn't care that my heart had been turned inside out. The world kept spinning. I fed the cat, poured a glass of wine, and finally opened my phone. 12 missed calls from Lena. 2 texts. Please don't be mad. Let me explain, please. I didn't reply. Instead, I scrolled to David's number. It had been over a year since I'd last seen his name on my screen. My thumb hovered, then pressed call. He answered on the second ring. Maya. Just my name, and in that one word, all the ghosts came rushing back. I got an invitation, I said quietly. There was silence on the line. A car horn blared in the background, then his voice, cautious. I wanted to tell you. But Lena thought what? That I wouldn't find out? He sighed. It wasn't planned like that. Then how was it planned, David? I could hear the tremor in my voice, because it feels like the two of you rehearsed this betrayal for months. I didn't mean for it to happen. We ran into each other. After everything ended, we started talking and it just happened. I said, my tone sharper now. That's convenient. You just happened to fall in love with my best friend? He stayed quiet, David, I whispered. Were you seeing her before we divorced? No, he said immediately, too quickly. It was after. I swear, I wanted to believe him. God, I wanted to. But something in his voice, a small hesitation, a dip, told me he wasn't being entirely honest. I hung up before I could say something I'd regret. And then, for the first time in years, I screamed. It wasn't dramatic. It was quiet and guttural, the kind that comes from somewhere deep inside, where pain collects like dust. For days after, I moved through life like a ghost. At work, I smiled when patients checked in, handed out clipboards, said, "Have a great day," on autopilot. But the moment I was alone, I'd feel it again. The humiliation, the ache. How many times had Lena sat in my living room, sipping wine, listening to me cry about my marriage? How many times had she comforted me, while maybe secretly texting him? The memories began replaying, sharper now, crueler. That weekend last spring when she'd canceled brunch, saying she wasn't feeling well. The time David had come by to drop off some old papers, and she'd stayed longer than usual after. The random gifts she'd shown me, a bracelet, a bottle of perfume, things I now realized weren't just because purchases. It all lined up, piece by piece, like a cruel jigsaw puzzle, and I was the last to see the picture. A week later, she showed up at my door. I didn't open it at first. I watched from the peephole as she stood there, clutching her purse, mascara smudged. She looked smaller somehow, or maybe I just finally saw her for what she was. "Maya," she said softly through the door. "Please, just let me talk." I hesitated, then opened it halfway. "You've got 5 minutes." She exhaled in relief and stepped inside. "I didn't mean for you to find out like that. I wanted to tell you, but you were too busy planning table settings," I said. Tears welled in her eyes. "I know how it looks. I know I hurt you, but I swear it started after you two split. I never—" "Stop," I said, raising my hand. "Don't insult me with half-truths." She bit her lip, silent. "Tell me," I continued, "did you talk to him while we were still married?" She hesitated. "We texted sometimes. About you. I was trying to help." "Help?" I laughed bitterly. "You helped by building a bridge from my pain to your happiness?" Her voice broke. "I didn't plan to fall in love with him. It just happened." There it was again, that phrase. It just happened. Like gravity. Like a slip of fate that no one could control. "Do you love him?" I asked finally. She nodded, tears spilling now. "I do. I wish I didn't, but I do." And strangely, that hurt more than anything else. Because for the first time I believed her. I felt a dull ache in my chest. Not fiery rage, just a hollow acceptance. The kind of pain that doesn't scream anymore because it's too tired to. "I hope," I said quietly, "that he treats you better than he treated me." She flinched. "Maya, Please go. She stepped toward me, but I turned away. I can't look at you right now, I whispered. The door clicked shut behind her. That night, I sat by the window, rain tapping against the glass. The invitation still lay on the table. I stared at it until the ink blurred through my tears. It felt like grief all over again. Except this time, it wasn't just the end of love. It was the death of trust. People talk about heartbreak like it's a clean break, a single moment when everything shatters. But it's not. It's slow. It's in the mornings you wake up thinking about them, in the songs you skip on purpose, in the silence between text notifications that will never come. And somehow, the pain from betrayal by a friend cuts deeper than betrayal by a lover. Because friendship isn't supposed to be conditional. It's supposed to be safe. I thought of all the times I'd defended her when others called her impulsive. The times I'd loaned her money, driven across town to pick her up drunk, forgiven her for forgetting birthdays. I had been her constant, and she had been my undoing. A few weeks later, word got around. Our mutual friends began to whisper. Some tried to stay neutral. Others quietly took sides. I could feel it in the way conversations trailed off when I entered a room. "Oh, Maya," one of them said at brunch. "Lena didn't mean to hurt you. You know how love is." "Love doesn't need to betray to exist," I replied calmly. "That's not love. That's selfishness dressed in romance." I wasn't loud. I didn't shout. But there was something new in my tone. Resolve. And that scared people more than anger ever could. Still, the ache didn't vanish. I'd lie if I said I handled it gracefully every day. Some nights I poured a second glass of wine and cried until my eyes burned. Other nights I laughed bitterly at how absurd it all was. There were moments I almost texted her, to ask if she ever thought about me when she looked at him, to ask if she wore the perfume I once gave her on their date nights, but I never did. Because I knew no answer could ever undo what they'd done. And deep down, I understood something. Betrayal doesn't always come from enemies. Sometimes it's delivered with a hug. The day of their wedding came faster than I'd expected. I didn't plan to go, not at first. The thought of seeing them together, smiling, vowing eternity under the same vows I once believed in, it was too much. But curiosity has a way of disguising itself as courage. I told myself I just wanted closure. Truthfully, I wanted to see the face of the man who could look me in the eye after tearing my life apart, and the woman who'd helped him do it. The invitation was still on my table, a small rectangle of polished deceit. One evening, as rain tapped gently on my window, I held it in my hand and whispered to myself, "You'll go, not for them, but for you." So, I did. It was an outdoor wedding, held at a vineyard an hour outside the city. I remember the smell of wet grass and roses, the hum of chatter, the faint music of a string quartet. Everyone was dressed in pale colors, soft pinks, creams, sage greens, like a dream too delicate to touch. I stood in the back, half hidden behind a row of hydrangeas, the invitation tucked in my clutch like a secret. And then I saw them. David in a navy suit. Confident, polished, the same man I'd once built a life with. Lena radiant in lace, her blonde hair swept up in soft curls. The same woman who'd once held my hand through heartbreak. Now they stood hand in hand before an altar draped in white, their faces glowing with that particular light people have when they believe they've won something precious. I should have left then, but I didn't. The officiant began to speak, words about love and trust and faithfulness. Each one landed like a stone in my chest when he said, "If anyone here has reason, these two should not be joined." For a moment, my breath caught. The world went quiet, as if the air itself waited. My fingers tightened around the invitation. My pulse thundered in my ears. I could have said something. I could have told them all, but I didn't. I swallowed the storm and watched as they said, I do, because sometimes silence screams louder than truth. After the ceremony, I turned to leave, but then I heard her voice behind me. Maya? I froze. She was walking toward me, bouquet still in hand, her veil fluttering. David followed a few steps behind, his smile faltering when he saw me. Maya, she said again, breathless, nervous. You came. I forced a small smile. Apparently, David's jaw tightened. You shouldn't be here, he murmured. Why not? I asked, my voice calm, almost too calm. I was invited. Lena looked between us, her eyes wide with guilt. David, no, I interrupted. Let him speak. He's good at that, isn't he? Speaking without saying anything. He exhaled sharply. We didn't want to hurt you, I laughed, a bitter, hollow sound. Then congratulations. You failed beautifully. People nearby had started glancing over, sensing tension. I lowered my voice. You could have told me, both of you. You could have been honest. But you chose to let me help plan the damn thing. Lena's lip trembled. I wanted to tell you, but you wanted me to stay blind, I said. You wanted my blessing without the burden of my truth. David rubbed the back of his neck, a habit I knew too well. Maya, please. We didn't plan this to happen behind your back. It just happened, I finished for him, eyes narrowing. That phrase again. You two should have it engraved on your rings. For a moment, silence stretched between us, heavy and sharp. Then I said quietly, You both took something from me. But it's not my husband I mourn. It's my trust. It's the years I spent believing you were my friend. Lena reached for my hand, tears brimming. I still love you, Maya. Then why does love feel so much like betrayal when it comes from you? I turned away before either of them could answer. Driving home, I rolled the windows down. The air was cool, almost cleansing. For the first time, I didn't cry. There was a strange peace in finally facing the truth, like pulling a thorn that had been buried too long. When I reached home, I poured a cup of tea instead of wine. I sat on the floor, watching the steam curl upward, and whispered to myself, You survived. Because that's what heartbreak is. Really, survival disguised as sadness. In the weeks that followed, the news spread. People talked. Some condemned them, others called it fate. I stayed quiet, but silence doesn't mean surrender. One evening, I received a message from an old mutual friend. Tara, hey, I don't know if you've seen this, but Lena posted a thank you post from the wedding. You might want to read it. I clicked the link. Her post was long and glowing, filled with pictures of them dancing, laughing. But it was one sentence near the end that froze me. And to my dearest friend Maya, thank you for your love and support throughout this journey. I couldn't have done it without you. The comments flooded beneath. So sweet! That's real friendship. You're such an inspiration. I felt my stomach twist. That wasn't gratitude. That was performance. A public rewrite of our story, painting betrayal as blessing. So for the first time, I broke my silence. I commented, You're welcome. Lena, though I never realized helping plan your wedding meant planning my own heartbreak, wishing you both all the honesty you denied me. I didn't think much of it. I didn't post to humiliate. I just wanted my truth to exist somewhere outside of me. Within hours, people noticed. The post disappeared by morning. 2 days later, my phone rang again. It was Lena. I can't believe you'd humiliate me like that. She snapped the moment I answered. I didn't humiliate you, I said calmly. I just told the truth. You've turned everyone against me. I didn't have to. You did that yourself, her voice broke. Why can't you just let me be happy? I did, I whispered. For years, I let you be happy, even when your happiness came from my pain. There was silence. Then, softly I said, I hope you find peace. Lena, because I already have. And I hung up. After that, I unfollowed both of them, deleted the pictures, boxed up the memories. It wasn't out of bitterness. It was an act of self-respect. Sometimes healing isn't loud. It's quiet. It's choosing to stop checking who they've become and start rediscovering who you are. I began spending weekends hiking again, something I hadn't done in years. I learned how to cook for one without calling it sad. I even joined a pottery class, shaping clay into small, imperfect bowls that somehow felt symbolic. I realized, little by little, that the life I lost wasn't the only life worth living. Still, some nights the memories came back, soft, uninvited. The smell of David's cologne, Lena's laugh from another room. But they didn't hurt as sharply anymore. They just reminded me that I'd survived something most people don't talk about, betrayal wrapped in friendship. And as strange as it sounds, I began to forgive. Not because they deserved it, but because I deserved peace. Forgiveness doesn't come like a sunrise. It doesn't wash over you in light and warmth. It comes in fragments, like shards of glass you slowly gather until they stop cutting. A few months after their wedding, I started noticing that people had begun treating me differently. Not cruelly, just carefully, like I was something fragile, a porcelain version of who I used to be. At work, my coworkers avoided mentioning weddings or engagements. My neighbor, Mrs. Dawson, would bring me casseroles every Sunday, just in case you don't feel like cooking. And my mother, bless her, called every morning just to ask, "Are you okay today, sweetheart?" The truth? I was tired of being okay. I wanted to be something else, angry, alive, free, anything but okay. So, I started saying yes to things that scared me. When my colleague Sarah invited me to a charity gala, I went alone. I wore a deep emerald dress that hugged me in places I used to hide, and I caught myself smiling at the mirror before leaving. It wasn't pride, it was recognition. At the event, I met people who didn't know my story, and for once, I didn't have to be the woman whose husband married her best friend. I was just Maya, the woman who laughed too loudly, who loved Pinot Noir, who could still dance when the right song played. There was freedom in anonymity. Then one night, about 6 months later, I ran into someone I hadn't seen since before the wedding, one of David's old co-workers. James, he spotted me in line at a cafe. "Maya, wow, you look great," I smiled politely. "Hi, James, how's everyone doing?" He shifted awkwardly. Good, I heard about everything." "I'm sorry." "Don't be," I said. "It wasn't your fault." He hesitated, then lowered his voice. "I probably shouldn't say this, but you were right, you know. Right about what?" He leaned closer. They started seeing each other before the divorce. Everyone at the office knew. For a moment, the air went out of the room. I steadied my breath. "Everyone?" He nodded. "Yeah. David tried to keep it quiet, but people talk. He'd bring her to events and say she was a friend, but... Well, you get it." I nodded slowly. "Yeah, I get it." I thanked him, took my coffee, and walked out. My hands were trembling, not from shock, but from the strange calm that comes when the truth finally matches your intuition. It turned out my gut had been right all along, and that realization didn't shatter me. It freed me, because now there was no room left for doubt. No what-ifs. Just truth. Bitter, clean, liberating truth. A few days later, I did something I'd been avoiding. I went back to the old house. It had been sold, of course. A young couple lived there now, their porch decorated with pumpkins and fairy lights. But I parked across the street and sat there for a while, watching the windows glow. I remembered every corner of that house, the creak in the hallway, the coffee stain on the carpet, the faint lavender smell from our laundry detergent. It had once been a home built on shared dreams. Now it was just a structure that contained ghosts. So I whispered a quiet goodbye, not to David, not to Lena, but to the version of myself who once thought love required self-sacrifice. When I drove away, I didn't look back. Weeks turned into months. Seasons changed. Spring came, and with it, the annual neighborhood fair. Lena and David were there, of course. This was a small town, after all. You can't avoid ghosts forever. I saw them near the food stalls, laughing with friends, their hands intertwined. My stomach clenched, but then I realized I wasn't trembling. I wasn't even angry. I just saw them. Two people who'd made their choices. When Lena noticed me, her face faltered. She whispered something to David, who turned too, his expression unreadable. I could have walked away. But I didn't. I walked right up to them. "Hi," I said, with a smile that came easier than I expected. Lena blinked. "Maya, hi." David looked uncomfortable. "Hey, how've you two been?" I asked casually, like we were old acquaintances. "Good," Lena said quickly. "Just busy. How about you?" "Thriving," I said. Finally sleeping through the night without remembering arguments about thermostat settings, she laughed awkwardly. "That's good." "Yeah," I said. "It is." There was a long pause. Then I added softly, "I meant what I said before. I hope you both find peace. Whatever it takes." She looked like she wanted to cry. David just nodded, and that was that. I turned, bought myself a funnel cake, and watched the parade go by. The sun was warm, and for the first time I felt it fully. No shadow attached. After that day, something inside me shifted permanently. I started writing again. Small essays, reflections on love and resilience. I submitted one to a local magazine called Heartlines. They published it. The title was simple: "When Trust Breaks, You Don't Have to Shatter Too." The response was overwhelming. Women wrote to me from all over, sharing their own stories of betrayal, heartbreak, and rebirth. Some said they found courage in my words. Others said it made them finally leave relationships that had already ended in spirit. That's when I realized maybe this pain wasn't just meant to destroy me. Maybe it was meant to teach me, and through teaching, I could help others. One evening, about a year after the wedding, I received a message request on Facebook. It was from Lena. "I read your article. You wrote beautifully." "I'm sorry again, Maya. I know it doesn't change what happened, but I needed you to know. I think of you often." I stared at the message for a long time. My heart didn't race. My palms didn't sweat. I just felt still. So I typed back, "Thank you, Lena. I hope you're doing okay." "Truly." She responded with a heart emoji, and that was the last time we ever spoke. From then on, I lived differently. I stopped apologizing for protecting my peace. I stopped explaining why some people were no longer in my circle, and I stopped mistaking forgiveness for access. Forgiveness is about letting go, not letting back in. Now, when I look back, I don't see a story about betrayal anymore. I see a story about becoming. I learned that sometimes the people we trust the most are sent to teach us boundaries we didn't know we needed. That the universe doesn't punish, it redirects, and that walking away quietly can be the loudest form of strength. Time has a way of revealing things we once tried to hide, not loudly, but through whispers, glances, and the quiet unraveling of appearances. By the second year after their wedding, Lena and David's perfect image began to crack. I didn't go looking for updates, but in a small town, stories find you whether you want them or not. It started with murmurs. Someone at the grocery store mentioned that David had been let go from his firm after some internal conflict. A neighbor of Lena's told my friend Tara that she'd been spending a lot of time at her mother's house lately. I didn't feel joy hearing it. I felt pity, the kind that comes when you see someone still trapped in the same cycle you escaped. Because betrayal, no matter how it begins, never ends peacefully. A few months later, I got an invitation to a women's conference in the next town over. One of the editors from Heartlines was organizing a panel on resilience, and she wanted me to speak, me, the woman who once couldn't say her own story without shaking. I almost said no. But something inside me whispered, "Say yes." The night before the event, I stood in front of my mirror, rehearsing. My reflection stared back, older, stronger, softer in some ways, harder in others. My eyes had lost that constant shimmer of pain. They looked alive again. When I walked onto that stage the next morning, the lights were bright. The room was full of women, mothers, wives, friends, survivors. Some had tears in their eyes before I even spoke. I told them my story. Not the gossip version, not the sad version, the truth. How love can blind you, how friendship can deceive you, and how self-respect can resurrect you. I told them, sometimes people will call your boundaries bitterness. They'll say your silence is pride. Let them, because peace is louder than explanation. The room erupted in applause, but I wasn't performing. I was finally breathing. Afterward, women lined up to hug me, to share their stories. One woman whispered, "You said what I couldn't say." That moment changed something in me. I realized healing isn't just personal, it's communal. When we speak our truth, we give others permission to do the same. A week later, I was grocery shopping when I ran into Mrs. Dawson again. She leaned on her cart, smiling. "I saw you in the paper," she said. "That article about your talk, it was beautiful. You should be proud." "Thank you," I said. She lowered her voice. "You know, dear, that ex of yours? He came into the pharmacy last week. He looked worn down. Not the same man," I nodded politely. "People change." She tilted her head. "And Lena? I hear she's back with her mother for now," I shrugged. "That's between them and whatever they built." Mrs. Dawson smiled softly. "You've handled all this with such grace." "Not many would, Grace," I said quietly. "It's not natural. You have to practice it like breathing." That night, I sat by my window with a cup of tea and thought about the word grace. It's easy to confuse grace with weakness, to think staying calm means you weren't broken. But grace isn't about not breaking. It's about rebuilding without bitterness, and that's what I'd done. Months passed. My story kept finding readers online. Sometimes I'd get messages from strangers, women in Texas, Canada, even as far as Scotland. One said, "You don't know me, but your story made me leave a friendship that was slowly killing my confidence." Each message felt like a thread connecting me to a bigger tapestry of survival. But one message stood out. It came from a name I didn't expect, from David Harris. Subject, "I owe you an apology." I stared at it for a long time. My heart didn't race like before. It just thudded, steady and curious. I opened it. "Maya, I don't expect you to respond. I just wanted to say I'm sorry. You didn't deserve how things happened. I convinced myself it was harmless when I first started talking to Lena. I thought I was being honest by waiting until after the divorce. But the truth is, I wasn't. Emotionally, I'd already crossed the line. I see that now. She and I aren't together anymore. I think we were both running from guilt, and it caught us. I wanted you to know that I've carried that guilt every day. I hope life's been kinder to you than I was." Davide sat back in my chair, the screen's glow washing over me. My first instinct was sadness, not for him, but for the version of myself who had once needed this apology so desperately. Now, I didn't, so I wrote back, briefly, "David, thank you for saying what I already knew. I forgave you a long time ago, not for your sake, but for mine. I hope you find whatever healing you're still looking for." Maya, and with that, I deleted the message. Not out of anger, out of peace. That same weekend, I was invited to a local radio show to talk about emotional resilience. Sitting in that small studio, microphone before me, I felt a quiet kind of power. The host asked, "Maya, if you could tell your younger self one thing before all this happened, what would it be?" I smiled. I'd tell her, "Your worth doesn't shrink because someone else couldn't see it. It stays right where it is, waiting for you to remember." There was silence. Even the host didn't speak for a moment. Then she whispered, "That's beautiful. After the show aired, my inbox flooded again. But one message surprised me most, from Lena's younger sister, Amy. "Hi Maya, I just wanted to tell you, I've watched my sister fall apart these past months. I'm not excusing her, but I want you to know she finally understands what she did. She told me she dreams about you forgiving her. I think she's carrying that guilt like a stone. Thank you for never humiliating her publicly. You had every right to, but you didn't. That kind of mercy, it matters." I read it twice, maybe 3 times. My eyes blurred. That night, I lit a candle and whispered into the quiet, "I forgive her." Fully this time. And for the first time since that terrible day in the bakery, my chest didn't feel heavy. It felt light, almost empty in a good way. The next morning, I noticed something beautiful. The lilies in my garden, the same flowers I'd once tied ribbons around for her wedding, were blooming again. Life, in its poetic cruelty and kindness, has a way of giving back symbols we thought we'd lost. I smiled. "You can't keep love from growing," I murmured, "but you can choose where you plant it next." Peace doesn't arrive with fireworks or fanfare. It comes quietly, like the hush that follows a storm when the sky still drips, but the worst is over. By the 3rd year after everything, my life looked nothing like the one I had before. And that, to my surprise, was a blessing. I'd moved to a smaller town an hour north, near the lake. My new apartment had wide windows that faced the water, and every morning the light came in soft and forgiving. I filled it with books, plants, and laughter, things that asked nothing of me except care. I'd started teaching part-time writing workshops at the community center. It was a small class, 12 women, most in their 40s and 50s, each carrying their own stories like hidden bruises. We met every Thursday evening, drank tea, and wrote about the things we were too afraid to say out loud. One night after class, a student named Caroline lingered as the others left. She had tears in her eyes. "I just wanted to say," she said softly, "your story. It made me leave my ex. He never hit me, but he broke me all the same." I hugged her, not because I had the right words, but because I knew that pain, the invisible kind, the kind that doesn't leave marks, but lingers in your reflection. That's when I realized my story wasn't just about what happened to me. It was about what could happen after. Healing had become my purpose. Summer came. The air smelled like rain and cut grass. One Saturday morning, I joined a local hiking group, something I'd always wanted to do but never had the courage for. I arrived early, coffee in hand, scanning the crowd. That's when a man waved at me from across the lot. He was tall, mid-40s maybe, with kind eyes and the sort of smile that didn't need rehearsing. "First hike?" he asked. "First in a long time," I said. "I'm Daniel," he said, extending his hand. "Maya." "Nice to meet you, Maya. Don't worry, I'm terrible at keeping pace too. We'll survive together." We laughed, and for the first time in years, it didn't feel forced. As we climbed the trail, we talked about books, music, the weird comfort of small towns. He told me he was a widower, raising his teenage daughter. I told him I was rediscovering what peace looked like. There was no spark, no cinematic slow motion, just comfort, a steady rhythm that felt safe. By the end of the hike, he said, "There's a farmer's market next weekend. You should come," and I did. Daniel wasn't like David. He didn't fill silence with talk or fix things I didn't ask to fix. He listened. We'd sit by the lake and share stories about our mistakes, the kind of conversations that felt like exhaling. One evening he asked gently, "Do you still think about them? Your ex and your friend?" "Sometimes," I admitted. "Not with hate, though. Just curiosity about how it all looks from their side now." He nodded thoughtfully. "Maybe they think about you too." "Maybe," I said, smiling. But that's their weight to carry. He reached over and took my hand, not to claim it, but to hold it, like it was something fragile and strong at the same time. That night, as I drove home, I realized something I hadn't felt in a long time. I was open again. Not desperate, not guarded, just open. Months later, Daniel and I started dating. Slowly, gently. The kind of love that grows like ivy. Quietly, steadily, without needing attention. He never asked about my past unless I brought it up. And when I did, he listened without pity. "I'm glad you told me," he said once, "because now I know the kind of woman I'm lucky to have. One who knows how to survive the fire without turning to ash." That line stayed with me. Around that same time, Heartlines offered me a monthly column. They wanted me to write about emotional resilience, real stories from real women. I named the column Still Standing. The first issue featured my story, but not about betrayal. About recovery. About how peace isn't found in getting answers, but in learning to stop asking questions that only hurt to hear. The response was overwhelming. Letters poured in from readers. Stories of pain, yes, but also of transformation. One woman wrote, "I realized I've been the Lena in someone else's story. Your words made me see myself differently. I'm trying to make amends. It hit me then. Every story has more than one side. And sometimes growth means accepting that even those who hurt us are still human, stumbling through their own storms." A year later, I got a postcard in the mail. No return address, just a handwriting I knew too well. "Dear Maya, you were right. We mistook guilt for love. I hope you found happiness. You deserve it more than anyone I know." L.I. read it twice. Then I smiled and slipped it between the pages of my journal. I didn't need closure, but it felt poetic somehow that she'd given it anyway. One crisp autumn evening, Daniel and I sat by the lake, wrapped in blankets, watching the sun melt into the water. He pointed at the horizon. "Beautiful, isn't it?" "It is," I said. "And quiet," he nodded. "You like quiet." "I used to be afraid of it," I admitted. "Because when things got quiet, I had to listen to my thoughts. Now quiet feels like home," he smiled. "Then you've come full circle." "Maybe," I said softly. "Or maybe this is just the first time I've stopped walking in circles." I often think back to that girl who once stood in the bakery, invitation trembling in her hand, watching her world tilt. If I could speak to her now, I'd tell her, "You won't recognize yourself one day. Not because you'll change, but because you'll finally become everything you were meant to be before they broke you." And I'd tell her this too. Pain doesn't define you. What you do after does. These days, I wake up early. I make coffee, open my window, and watch the morning mist rise from the lake. Sometimes I write, sometimes I just sit. I still believe in love, not the kind that fills every space, but the kind that leaves room for breathing. And I still believe in friendship, not the kind that takes without asking, but the kind that roots deep, quietly loyal. Most of all, I believe in myself, because when you learn to rebuild from ashes, you stop fearing fire. When I tell this story now, people often ask me, "How did you forgive them?" And I always say, forgiveness isn't something you give to someone. It's something you give back to yourself, because when you hold on to the bitterness, it doesn't hurt them, it poisons you. And I had spent enough years drinking from that cup, so I poured it out, slowly, patiently, one memory at a time. These days, when I see a couple walking hand in hand, I don't think of what I lost. I think of what I learned. That love without honesty is just comfort with an expiration date. That friendship without loyalty is just company waiting to collapse. And that self-respect, that quiet, steady thing inside you, must never be negotiated. Not even for love that once felt like home. Sometimes I still dream of that moment in the bakery. The invitation, the lilies, the shock that hollowed me out. But in the dream now, I'm not the same woman standing there frozen. In the dream, I take the invitation, I smile at her, and I simply say, "Thank you for showing me who you both really are." And then I walk away. Not out of anger, but out of wisdom. Because that's the thing about truth. Once you see it, you can't unsee it. But you can choose to walk towards something better. A few months ago, Daniel and I went to a small wedding. One of my students was marrying her high school sweetheart after years apart. As she walked down the aisle, the sunlight hit her face just right, and I remembered how painful that same sight used to be for me. Back then, seeing a white dress felt like a wound reopening. But this time, I smiled, because healing means being able to look at joy again without feeling envy or grief. Just quiet appreciation that love, in all its messy forms, still exists in the world. After the ceremony, Daniel squeezed my hand and whispered, "You look happy." "I am," I said. For her, for me, for everything that survived. Later that night, I sat on the porch watching the candles flicker, and I realized something I wish I'd known all along. When someone betrays you, they're not rewriting your story. They're removing themselves from your pages and what you write next. That's entirely up to you. I've written many endings in my life. But this one, this quiet chapter of peace, feels less like an ending and more like a homecoming to myself, to dignity, to that deep, still place where I know who I am, even when love walks away. If you're listening to this and you've been where I was, blindsided, heartbroken, betrayed by someone who promised to love you, I want you to know something. You are not foolish for trusting. You are not weak for breaking. You are human, and being human means sometimes loving the wrong people before you learn to love yourself the right way. Don't rush your healing. Don't hide your scars. They are not your shame. They are your proof that you survived what was meant to destroy you. Now, when I close my journal at night, I write one line at the bottom of every page. Trust your gut. Protect your peace. Because that's what all of this came down to in the end. A gut feeling I ignored, and peace I had to rebuild from the ground up. When I think of Lena now, I don't feel hate. I feel distance, the soft, respectful kind that comes when a lesson is finished. And when I think of David, I don't feel anger. I feel gratitude, not for the pain, but for the clarity it gave me. They taught me what not to settle for. And sometimes that's just as valuable as love itself. If you've listened this far, maybe you've been through your own version of this story. Maybe your betrayal came from a friend, a sibling, a lover. Maybe you're still sitting in that silence, wondering how to move again. If that's you, I want to tell you something from my heart. You will rise. Not suddenly, not perfectly, but beautifully. Because healing doesn't erase the scar. It teaches you to live with it proudly. And so, I leave you with this question. If you found out the people you loved most were capable of breaking you, would you still choose to forgive? Not for them, but for yourself? Tell me in the comments below, because sometimes your story might be the one that helps another soul find their way back to peace.